And it's over to Cape Town this time, where Caitlin Roith is next up. Caitlin has travelled all the way from Stellenbosch, where she is both a law lecturer at the university and activist. She focuses on issues of law, justice, and injustice, mainly within South Africa. But she has also researched and written about international law and international law's failure to hold Israel accountable for human rights violations. And she has some very interesting things to say about that. And so I'm going to hand over to Cape Town to run the proceedings from here on.
Hi, everyone. Are we good? You can put it on if it's easier. Sure. Sorry, I'm just pulling up my notes. My talk is kind of adjusted throughout the day because it's been, really interesting to listen to all of the perspectives. But I've also found that, certain issues were covered, other issues maybe were touched on. So I thought I would adjust it slightly to respond to some questions that have come up, but then also to really talk about what I was asked to talk about today, which is Israel's legal responsibility in international law, but more specifically, the phenomenon whereby Israel has been charged with, found to have violated various international legal provisions, various conventions. There's a lot of evidence that they have actually breached these conventions. But nothing really has happened. Materially, nothing has happened. We haven't seen any responsibility to protect initiatives. We haven't seen any sanctions, real sanctions. We haven't really seen the international community, or at least the international community with power, put pressure on Israel for what it has done. So what I'm speaking about today is what is frequently referred to as the Israel exception. It is something that has emerged in the discourse around international law and international legal responsibility. And it is the phenomenon whereby Israel is treated as almost an exceptional case when it comes to our international responsibilities and the norms of international law. So what I argue, and what many others have argued, this isn't a new argument. A lot of what I'm saying is derivative, as most ideas are. So I'm going to be drawing on a lot of scholarship from mostly Jewish scholars of genocide and the Holocaust, but also from reports of the United Nations, opinions from the International Court of Justice, and work that's been done long before I was even born. So I'm drawing on a lot of things from outside, and most of what I'm saying is not original, just a disclaimer. So over the course of Israel's relatively short lifespan, it has emerged as a paradigmatic case of international law's failures. A lot of people say that international law is dead, and that Israel is a good example of why international law is said to be dead. It shows the limits of the international legal system, and the way in which the system has been designed has been such that rarely it's only states with political, military, and economic power that can ever decide who is held accountable for what they do. Israel has been lucky enough to have the side of the United States. So the United States has constantly intervened on its behalf, has vetoed resolutions that may lead to it being held accountable. So it's had a solid ally in one of the world's superpowers, the world's main superpower, definitely today, but for most of its history. So it is difficult to not reach this conclusion that Israel is this paradigmatic case of the failures of international law when you look at what Israel has been capable of, what it's been able to do without any repercussion over the course of its life. Specifically in the context of the prohibition of genocide, which is a recent allegation, although it has been made previously as a kind of consequence of settler colonialism and ethnic cleansing. So the argument that genocide is inevitable has actually been made many, many years ago. For example, Prof. Amos Goldberg, who many of you may have read a more recent explanation for why he has concluded that it is genocide. He was also invited by the JDI to give a talk on this. In 2011, he was already warning that this could happen, that the seeds, the ingredients are there. In Francesca Albanese's brilliant report, one of the most comprehensive reports I've seen, it's called Anatomy of a Genocide from March 2024, she talks about genocide as a process. And I thought it would be quite interesting to just look at this aspect of genocide as a process, as something that is part of a system of settler colonialism and ethnic cleansing. And these are all international legal concepts. They're not political slogans or words to express outrage. They do have meaning in international law, and they are international legal concepts. So genocide becomes part of this process on this view of genocide as a process. But just to take a few steps back, the prohibitions on genocide and racial discrimination and apartheid, all of the gravest allegations that have been leveled against Israel, and some of the maybe more dangerous ideas, if we can call it that, the ones that if you say it, you're either charged with blood libel or you're charged with anti-Semitism. So they have become the more dangerous ideas, so to speak. But these prohibitions are both codified in international conventions, which Israel is a states party to. So Israel has signed to the Genocide Convention. It has also signed to the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which was signed in 1965. It has 182 states parties, which is a lot. The Genocide Convention also has many states parties. So there's this sense that in the international community, or at least in the international community of states, most states accept that these two things, racial discrimination, which is broadly defined in the convention, it includes ethnic, racial, and religious discrimination and other forms of identity. Racial discrimination and genocide are seen as very, very grave things, right? This is evidenced by the widespread support for these conventions, but it is also evidenced by the fact that both of these crimes or both of these prohibitions are considered to be jus cogens norms in international law. What that means is that they are considered to be of a peremptory status. They are of an absolute status. They are non-derogable. In this way, even if you have not signed to the Convention on Genocide or Racial Discrimination, these norms are binding on you. They're seen as absolutely binding. So the fact that Israel, for example, has made a reservation, they've said they do not consent to a certain aspect of the Genocide Convention. Which aspect is that? Well, no surprises here. It is the aspect of the ICJ's jurisdiction to determine acts of genocide. So Israel has said, we consent to the rest of the Genocide Convention, but not this part. What does that signal to us? That yes, Israel might signify through signing this convention that it is accepting that genocide could be something it could commit, but it places on record that it will not accept the ICJ's jurisdiction in respect of actually preventing, deciding questions of genocide. So there's already an indication there that Israel might signal its acceptance of the norms of international law, but when it comes to the process of enforcing it against Israel, they will use whatever tool they have to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that has been the history that we've seen when we look at every single time Israel has been charged with something, every single time a report has come out documenting meticulously what evidence there is of that thing, Israel will use what it has available to it to make sure that that doesn't lead to any real consequences. So one point I wanted to make today is about this charge of genocide, because I think we've spoken about it today. We've touched on, questions of starvation and the mass killing and the ways in which the Palestinians in Gaza have been experiencing the last 2.5 years. What we haven't really spoken about is the fact that this has been an ongoing process, but it has been a process that was signaled, what it was going to become was signaled quite early on. So today, there seems to be general consensus, maybe not in this room, but in most reputable circles, there's general consensus that that Gaza is experiencing a famine. And you'll recall that quite early on, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and this was a phrase that was repeated often, said at the beginning of the genocide on the 9th of October that we are imposing a complete siege on Gaza, no electricity, no food, no fuel, no water. We are fighting human animals and we will act accordingly. And then he proceeded to do just that. And that has intensified with the bombardments, with the blocking of aid, with the number of bombs and ammunitions that have been dropped. All of this has led us to a point where not only have tens of thousands, possibly even hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been killed, but we are seeing severe levels of malnutrition, we are seeing severe levels of starvation, and it has been declared that there is a famine either already occurring or imminent. So when Yoav Galan said this, and this was on the 9th of October, I'll admit it was quite early on, but I immediately felt, okay, this is genocide. This seems like genocide. This looks like genocide. You've said you're going to do this, and now you're doing it, and you're actually implementing these acts. You know, do we start calling it what it looks like once we already see the results? Or do we start calling it what it looks like when the patterns start to emerge? And that's kind of where I want to sit for a few minutes. And do we wait? Do we wait until the accounting has been done? Will the accounting ever be done? Is that what international law requires of us? No, I mean, the Genocide Convention places an obligation to prevent genocide when we see it occurring. So for a lot of us who were looking at what was happening and who knew the levels of dehumanization that were occurring within Israeli society, and particularly in the high levels, you know, in high command levels and in the Israeli government, it was hard to avoid the conclusion that we are going to see something grave, potentially genocidal, unfold, even on that day of the 9th of October, at least for me. When we look at the features on the ground, it becomes hard to not say that the ingredients for genocide were already present, that the foundations for what was going to happen in Gaza were being laid many, many years before Yoav Galant made that declaration. The use of dehumanizing language has been widespread. We've seen it. We've seen the clips. Law for Palestine has a continually updated database of genocidal statements from politicians to interviewees on mainstream media in Israel to soldiers on the ground. And it has at least now over 500 recorded expressions of genocidal intent on this database. Dr. Raz Sigal, who you may all have also come across, one of the earlier kind of Israeli historians to conclude that this is a textbook case of genocide, in his piece in the Jewish Currents, he refers to an interviewee on Channel 14 who calls for turning Gaza into Dresden. He also refers to the widespread use of genocidal verbs like erase and flatten when talking about Gaza, or a banner on a bridge in Tel Aviv, which just says this chilling two-word slogan, "Zero Gazans." The fact that this is widespread and normalized within the society for Dr. Sigal was evidence that genocidal intent was there. And all you needed was for it to be coupled with the genocidal acts. At that stage, Israel's Air Force had dropped over 6,000 bombs on Gaza. And this was early on. I forgot the exact date of his report, but it was in October. 6,000 bombs of Gaza, on Gaza, which is one of the most densely populated areas in the world. And this is almost as many bombs as the US dropped in Afghanistan during its record-breaking long war there. So just to illustrate the scale of the destruction on this tiny strip in that period of time. We've also seen investigations that artificial intelligence is being used to make decisions about who is a military target and who isn't. Again, part of this pattern of how the military campaign was prosecuted in Gaza. Dr. Goldberg, Amos Goldberg, who I've mentioned, but who the JDMI members will know, a professor of Holocaust history at the Department of Jewish History at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, in April 2024 said, yes, it is genocide. And the fact that the military allowed, and this is where this distinction comes in, the fact that the military allowed, for example, the killing of 300 innocent people and the destruction of an entire residential district in order to hit one Hamas brigade commander shows that military targets are almost incidental targets for killing civilians, and that every Palestinian in Gaza is in fact doomed. For Dr. Goldberg, this is the logic of genocide. It's about excluding civilians as anyone that needs to be protected, but the military target becomes the incidental target, and the civilians bear the brunt of the quote-unquote war. To bring us to today, because I've been speaking about some findings that were made a couple of months and maybe even years ago, there are close to 60,000 reported fatalities. Some may doubt my numbers. These are the numbers that the UN uses. These are also the numbers that Israel itself uses. These are the numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry. Often these numbers are called into question, but they are the most reputable, reliable numbers that we have. And I trust the UN. I don't believe that the UN is anti-Semitic or that they are lying about numbers. These 60,000 include approximately 18,000 children, which would be expected in an area that comprises 50% children, 143,000 reported injuries, 80% of the croplands destroyed. Less than 5% of cropland is actually available for use, proper use. 92% of Gaza's housing has been totally destroyed or severely damaged. 70% of all structures across the strip have been destroyed or damaged. Over 2,000 entire families have been eliminated over this 2.5-year period. 2,000 entire families, and families in Gaza are big. These are big families, all bloodlines eliminated. And as Jews, I think we learn a lot about entire families that were obliterated during the Nazi genocide in Europe. To hear a number like that it's heartbreaking. And it's something that I don't think we should ignore when we are coming to this or engaging in this analysis of, is it actually a genocide? Does it feel like something else here is going on, and that it is maybe not just a war crime, although war crimes are terrible, maybe not a crime against humanity, maybe not just a war being prosecuted badly, but something more? Around 6,000 families only have one survivor. And it's got the highest number of amputee children in the world per capita. So that's one of Gaza's grim distinctions. Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, which I'm sure many of us have heard these words being said, it defines genocide as the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. This is the intent requirements, and it has to be coupled with acts. The acts are killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. I'm not going to focus on the acts because I think when we look at the evidence, there is evidence of killing. There is evidence of causing serious bodily or mental harm. The amount of mental and psychological anguish that the Palestinians in Gaza have had to face over the last 2.5 years, I don't think anyone could doubt that. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part is something that I will spend a little bit of time on. But again, I think the evidence speaks for itself. Where the sticking point seems to be is on the question of intent. So I thought it might be useful to make a few points on that. So when it comes to genocidal intent, there are two aspects. The first is deliberate intent to perform a particular act, right? So if I drop my pen, I intended to do that. I picked up my pen and then I dropped it. That was intentional. If, for example, I'm holding my pen and someone distracts me or knocks my arm and then it drops, that was not an intentional act. So the first type, the part of intent, is just, did they intend to do this thing? Was it accidental that a bomb was dropped on a residential building, or was there someone who pressed a button and the bomb was dropped on the residential building? That part is relatively easy to establish, at least in context of quote-unquote war. The second aspect is this specific intent, right? Intent to destroy a group, the targeted group, by the acts as such. So the group itself, it's to destroy the group as such. The specific intent can be determined through direct evidence. So we often talk about official documents that state what the intention is, or possibly statements by high command, members of high command, which we have evidence of in this context, but often they're passed off as rhetoric or something that is taken out of context, but we do have that. But there is another way of proving specific intent that often isn't given as much attention. We like to sit in that, oh, it's so narrow, it's so specific, we need our smoking gun. But intent, and this is well established in International Court of Justice jurisprudence, is that intent can be inferred from what international tribunals refer to as patterns of conduct. So patterns of conduct on the ground, you can infer the existence of this specific intent from those patterns of conduct. When you are doing that, when you are establishing intent through inferring it through patterns of conduct, these patterns of conduct must only point to genocidal intent as the explanation for the patterns. The presence of genocidal intent, therefore, must be the only inference or the only reasonable inference that could be drawn from the facts on the ground. When it comes to Act 3, which I paused on for a second, that's deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, we don't need evidence that that result has been achieved, that they have actually brought about the physical destruction in whole or in part of the group. What we do need to show is proof that there is the intent to achieve that particular result. Okay, so you don't have to show that the actual result was achieved, but just intent to achieve that particular result. Omer Bartov, Dr. Omer Bartov, he's an Israeli-American historian and professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Brown University. In a very recent piece in the New York Times, he finally came to the conclusion that this is genocide. And he said that in Israel's case, that intent, the specific intent, has been publicly expressed by numerous officials and leaders, but intent can also be derived from patterns of operations on the ground. And this pattern for Dr. Bartov became clear by May 2024 and has since become even clearer that the IDF has systematically destroyed the Gaza Strip. His inescapable conclusion is that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian people. And for Bartov, Israel's actions could be understood only as the implementation of the expressed intent to make the Gaza Strip uninhabitable for its Palestinian population. He refers to Giora Island, who talks about making Gaza into a place where no human being can survive. That is the goal, and the pattern of conduct and operations bring about that conclusion, the level of destruction, the level of devastation. It is uninhabitable. There is no possibility that the Palestinian people of Gaza can reconstitute themselves as a social, ethnic, cultural group in Gaza. And it is impossible to escape that conclusion when you look at what the Gaza Strip looks like and when you look at what the plan is for the Palestinian people in Gaza to confine them to what I would refer to as a concentration camp. So he believes, Dr. Bartov, that the goal was always and remains today to force the population to leave the strip altogether, and we've heard this plan be articulated, or to considering the fact that the population has nowhere to go, to debilitate the enclave through bombings and severe deprivation of food, clean water, sanitation, and medical aid to such an extent that it is impossible for Palestinians in Gaza to maintain or reconstitute their existence as a group. And this is through the destruction of housing, hospitals, educational facilities, cultural heritage sites, water treatment plants, washing facilities. It is impossible to live a normal life there, and it will be impossible to reconstitute a society there. And that is essentially why he finds that this is a textbook case of genocide. And the patterns of operations on the ground can only justify that inference. There is no other reasonable explanation for why entire cities have been leveled to rubble. There's no military objective there. It is just to render the strip uninhabitable. So we know that over a year and a half ago now, the ICJ ruled that there's a plausible case that genocide is being committed, or at least a prima facie case, if you want to put it in that there's plausibly a case that the Genocide Convention is being breached by Israel, and it ordered some provisional measures. In terms of this obligation to prevent genocide, the provisional measures were meant to be implemented to avoid it continuing. Those provisional measures were not followed. So at the beginning of Israel's deliberate campaign of starvation, the ICJ, and this was 2 months later, the ICJ issued a further set of measures. So a second set of provisional measures, given that the first set weren't complied with and that new policies were being implemented. These orders, again, were not complied with. So none of these measures were implemented. And again, 2 months later, the ICJ issued a third set of provisional measures. So given the extent of the devastation that has occurred between the ICJ's first finding and now, I think we can say with some degree of confidence that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Palestinians might have been saved. We might not be in a famine situation. We might not be seeing mass starvation and malnutrition. I think every day I'm seeing a report of another Palestinian who's died from starvation or severe hunger. So we can probably say with some degree of confidence that had the ICJ's provisional measures been implemented, we would see a different Gaza Strip today if they were taken seriously. So the question is, why has nothing been done? How is Israel allowed to continue this campaign for 2.5 years? And I have 3 kind of responses to that question. The first is about how the international legal system has been set up. We have the ICJ, which is maybe you could arguably say it's like the constitutional court of international law. It's the highest court. It's meant to kind of, pronounce on questions of justice and law, and it's been doing that for many of its, for its life. You have the ICC, which deals with questions of criminal liability. You have the UN General Assembly, which we know passes resolutions, and that acts as a kind of supposedly representative voice for the international community. But none of their resolutions are binding. But then we come to the UN Security Council. And the UN Security Council is the only body in the UN that actually has law enforcement capabilities. The UN Security Council is the organ mandated for any peacekeeping operations. It can approve international sanctions. And most importantly, it's the only organ that can authorize any military action. So any concrete action, if any concrete action is to be taken against Israel in the form of proper widespread sanctions or military intervention or peacekeeping forces on the ground, it has to go through the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council is made up of 15 members, 5 of which are permanent: UK, US, Russia, France, and China, the victors of World War II. They were all possessed with this absolute veto power. So anytime a resolution comes to the UN Security Council and one of those countries isn't happy with it, they can exercise their veto and nothing will happen. It can't be enforced. Unsurprisingly, the United States has been a loyal veto exerciser when it comes to blocking resolutions that might lead to anything changing on the ground when it comes to Israel. So out of all of the times, I think it's around 89 times that it's used its veto power, 50% of them have been in relation to resolutions that relate to Israel when the US has been exercising its veto power. So it really has been a loyal ally in that regard. So that's the first, I think, block for any form of responsibility or accountability. It's just the way in which the system's been set up. There's no police force, or if there is a police force, it requires political will behind that police force. It requires essentially the United States to support any form of direct action. Another area that there could be material consequences is in respect of boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, and that's kind of the responsibility of the international community. The problem with that is that if it is done by states, so if a state imposes sanctions on Israel, they can almost always expect retaliation from the United States in respect of actually standing up like that. So we do see blocks like the Hague Group, which does give me some optimism, forming where states are coming together, and possibly having a few states imposing sanctions could shield the others from any retaliation. So the Hague Group and groups like that do give me hope. But coming from one state, it is difficult to impose sanctions, or at least impose any sanctions that will meaningfully change anything on the ground. We also see in the United States crackdown on boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. So some states in the United States have BDS laws, or you have to sign a loyalty pledge to Israel if you want to speak at any official events or in any official institutions. If it is done by individuals, sometimes, again, you get backlash for calling for boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. The BDS movement has been vilified in the Jewish community, at least. Frequently here, it being referred to as a pejorative. You know, BDS it's a bad thing, but it really is the only non-violent, internationally protected mechanism that people in the international community have to put pressure on a state that is doing something that they are not happy with. Another feature of this backlash for pressure is through cases using definitions of anti-Semitism to try and stifle criticisms of Israel and Zionism. And we're seeing this happening on an almost systematic scale. I read yesterday that 50 students at Columbia were expelled for their participation in the encampments and the protests to end the genocide in Gaza. So we're seeing institutions adopt definitions of anti-Semitism or hate speech codes that directly target any criticisms or any statements of support that cross a line, which of course is going to suppress criticism. And sometimes speech is the only weapon that we have in the international community. So we're seeing this play out. We're seeing it play out here in our very own University of Cape Town. We are seeing these battles play out between speech and political, economic, legal repression. So the last most important factor, and the reason why I think nothing has been done, is that not only has the United States been blocking any efforts to hold Israel accountable or to do any meaningful intervention, they've also been actively, along with the UK, supplying weapons, offensive weapons, not only defensive weapons, to Israel. So directly assisting in the continuation of this campaign. So what are we left with? Well, a toothless international law, it seems. I go between the kind of we need to affirm the place of international law and international law is dead almost on a daily basis. I'm still trying to affirm the importance of international law, but I am left feeling a little bit despondent. So what are we left with? Us in the international community. We can educate ourselves. We can have conversations. We can put pressure in the small ways that, you know, we are able to, in terms of boycotting certain goods or encouraging sanctions. What we can also do is support our country, our government, who is actually taking real steps to hold Israel accountable. That support hasn't been given from the Jewish community in South Africa in any real way. The government's been accused of blood libel and anti-Semitism for doing its job in terms of the Genocide Convention by going to the ICJ asking for these provisional measures. So that kind of support internally, I think, is very important. And that is something that we can do. And what we can also do is we can affirm the place of criticism. So we can protect the space for criticizing what Israel's doing. We can shout loudly when people say things like, that is blood libel or that is anti-Semitism. And we can say, no, it is legitimate to say that. And it is a valid position to hold. So protecting the space for activism, for boycotts, for criticisms of Israel, and for criticisms of Zionism, I think are things that we can all do in a state that, as Alon said earlier, is maybe one that Israel doesn't care about. But when we do go to the ICJ, they start to care. We can support our country in those kinds of efforts. I just want to end off with a quote, again, by Omer Bartov, whose piece I thought was very comprehensive, persuasive. He writes that the continued denial of the designation of genocide by states, international organizations, and legal and scholarly experts will cause unmitigated damage, not just to the people of Gaza and Israel, but also to the system of international law established in the wake of the horrors of the Holocaust, designed to prevent such atrocities from ever happening again. It is a threat to the very foundations of the moral order upon which we all depend. So, if change is probably not going to come from within, change might come from outside. Change might not come from international law, but what we can do is we can try and affirm the place of international law. We can refuse to live in a world where Hague Schmaeg is a legitimate response to being taken to the International Court of Justice or being taken to the ICC. And these are the simplest things that we can do in the international community if we want to try and ensure that Israel actually stops committing its crimes, and try to affirm the place of this important thing that we have that is meant to be a check on power, is meant to be a check on control, is meant to be a check on violations of human rights. Because if we do live in a world where the person or state that has economic and military or political power, or who has economic, political and military allies that have a lot of power, it's power then that gets to decide who lives and who dies. And I think that the point of international law was, or at least the international law that we know, was to be a break from that. And I think that's what we all want. Yeah, I think I'm done. So if anyone has any questions.
Thank you very much. I'm here to assist with the Q&A. Basil, are you going to do it from there, or is Sally and I doing it the way we did it before? You and Sally. Do it with Sally. Okay, Cape Town, do you have a question there? Has anyone signaled? Would you like to take the first one there?
Is there any way the veto can be taken away from those 5 countries? Or is that Julian? Can't hear, is there a reason?
Yes, sorry, we can't hear. Any questions here? Question.
Test. Cool.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. Is there any way in which the veto can be taken away from the 5 countries, or that their veto can be challenged? Because that seems to be a major stumbling block.
Yeah, very good question. It is possible. It is possible to change like the structure and the composition of the Security Council, and there are moves to do that. Specifically, there's not one African state that is represented. So there are moves to change the composition, and there's also pushes to try and change the way the veto operates. So it is possible. How likely it is, unfortunately, it seems not very likely. Of course, the states with power aren't going to give up their power that easily. So any moves to change the composition or to make it more representative or to change how it functions have generally been pushed, suppressed quite a bit. But it is theoretically it's possible.
Thank you. We have a question.
That's the point, yeah.
We have a question from Johannesburg now.
Hi, thank you very much for that detailed explanation. Just wanted to make one statement that if anybody wants to participate in the boycott, sanctions and divest program, you can go to your Google app, or I'm not sure what's on Apple. It's called No Thanks. And No Thanks gives you a list internationally about all the products that you can actually boycott. And it also gives you the reason why you should boycott it, because it gives you background to the monies that has been spent in Israel. So that's all I wanted to say.
No question.
Thank
No statement.
that was very useful. No thanks. Look it up.
Okay, I have a question from here, and then we'll come to Cape Town.
my question is also an observation. If we look at the Jewish community in South Africa, that depends on a Bill of Rights that guarantees pluralism, that guarantees freedom of religion, culture, and expression, that guarantees that King David and Herzliya can provide a Jewish education. And yet, when it comes to the international legal system that protects these rights, we are happy to abandon them. I say we, clearly I'm not including myself. But the Jewish community is in a very real sense, quote, blinded by an unconditional loyalty to Zionism, which in itself is going to destroy the very basis for Jewish life outside of Israel. Maybe you can reflect on that paradox.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And one of the things I was thinking about in preparation for today was just looking at the wording of our Constitution, and then looking at the wording of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which speaks about equality of all people, the dignity of each person, similar wording that we find in our Constitution. And then contrasting that with, for example, it was mentioned earlier, the 2018 nation state law that was passed, which guarantee or states that Israel is exclusive, the right to self-determination is exclusive to the Jewish people. And then that contrasted with the fact that a bill was attempted to be introduced in Parliament to recognize the rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel and their place in that society, and it was immediately rejected. It was just discarded as if it wasn't even worth the paper that it was written on. And I think the contrast that you're picking up on is, yes, of course, our Jewish community is putting itself in a tricky situation that as a minority, it benefits from being treated as equal in the Constitution, but it is supporting a regime where there is no commitment to equality. And those contrasts, I think, are obvious when you look at the texts. Yeah, but thank you for that observation. Those are my reflections.
Thank you. I have a question here. Yeah. Oh, was that? I've jumped. Yeah. Right.
Thank you. A question. Is or might Hamas be committing any acts of genocide?
Currently?
In the last 2 or more years?
I would say no. I think war crimes were committed on October 7th, but genocide, no. There was no expression of intent to destroy an entire group. If you look at Hamas's response or accounting for its operation, it explained what it was doing, and I don't think you could point to the outdated charter that people often refer to as kind of evidence of genocidal intent. It's way too remote, and it was also adopted during a different kind of Hamas as a political organization. So no, I don't think that October 7th can be accurately classified as a genocide. There's just not enough evidence. That's my opinion, though.
Thank you. Cape Town, sorry, I skipped you out there. Have you got a question there?
Yes. Step forward. You said that the RCJ is toothless. There's a lot of people in the global south who would argue further that it's actually a weapon of the collective West and the empire. If you look at Iraq and what happened with 1 million Iraqis being killed and neither Tony Blair or George Bush being prosecuted, and there's like countless other examples of atrocities and wars initiated by the West or the collective West where there's been zero prosecution. So at the moment, as it stands, it's really only the enemies of the empire that are getting prosecuted. And in some ways, I think the chagrin of the USA towards South Africa is because we had the temerity to go to the RCJ and prosecute Israel. And I'm still curious why Naledi Pandor was removed, but I thought she was a very good foreign minister. But yeah, my question to you is it a weapon?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Again, it's part of this. It's a kind of, I guess it's my own kind of cognitive dissonance in that on the one hand, it's like the only tool we have, but maybe it reflects how I feel about the law. That the law is often, I think, it's a weapon by people in power to maintain a particular status quo, and there's a lot of evidence for this. And I think it's the same with international law. It has 100% been used as a weapon. The ICC, I think, is a perfect example of that. I mean, how many African leaders have been brought, but yeah. So I totally agree. Again, I guess I am speaking out of both sides of my mouth here in that on the one hand, the system is set up to preserve power, but I'm also hoping that that system can be used to subvert power, which is something that I hope for the law as well. So where our domestic law can be a tool to maintain a status quo, I think there are ways in which it can be used to transform the status quo. So I'm constantly having to go back and forth, but thank you for the contribution. I think it's 100% valid, and I agree with you.
Thank you very much. I have a question here.
Thank you, and thanks for an interesting debate. I just wonder, would the case of genocide be strengthened if all the hostages were released and then all this continued thereafter? Isn't that the test a little bit of what the genocide really means?
I think it's possible. I think maybe people would be more willing to accept that it is a genocide, because I think the releasing of the hostages has been used as a, or it has become a kind of sticking point, whereas maybe it didn't need to be one. One thing I would say is that Hamas has been willing, or stated that it was willing to release the hostages from very early on. So I think if that exchange had been taken seriously by Israel, possibly things would have changed. If Israel had carried on, maybe people would be more willing to accept. But to agree with that would require me to say that whatever Israel is doing is justified by the presence of the hostages. And I don't think that that's the case. And I don't think international law would say that that's the case when it comes to genocide.
Thank you. Cape Town, over to you for a question.
So thank you so much for that, Caitlin. Thank you for your clarity, and thank you for articulating what for me is the core of the matter. We know why the word genocide triggers us so much. And I'm speaking specifically to the observation you made that the organizations that claim to represent South African Jewry deny this as hard as they can, to the extent that they are smearing some of the organizations in this country that do the most work for the poorest in this country. And I'm talking specifically about Imtiaz Suleiman and Gift to the Givers, and this spurious smear campaign that started, we know where it started. I did a lot of work on this. It comes through the Border Deputies, the Zionist Federation, the Office of the Chief Rabbi. It's published in venues like Biz News. They don't stop. There's absolutely no evidence anywhere that Iran paid the ANC to take the case to the ICJ. We let them, and I know it was said last night that JDI, which is a wonderful initiative, and I'm really glad to be here, but it was said last night that JDI was not set up as anti, it was set up as other. But I would like to suggest that on this point, we need to be a bit louder. And we need to say, we support the government. I completely support what you say. As far as I'm concerned, it's a genuine foreign policy move. It's poetic and beautiful. That was brought by us.
Brave.
Zane Dangor has been amazing. We've got a fabulous legal team. Norman Finkelstein, I did an interview with him, had called it a work of genius, what our legal team managed to pull off, because in the initial submission, they used 500 footnotes that all referred to UN organizations or UN-affiliated organizations, which meant that if the ICJ didn't come with that finding, bar the one demurral, they would actually be undermining what the UN stood for. I also agree with what the previous speaker said around the global south and all of that. And for me, again, just to reiterate, this is the fundamental issue. And I just think that an organization like the JDI does offer an alternative voice that I think the whole country wants to hear.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Do you want to respond?
Please. No, I just want to also say that I'm a big admirer of your work, and thank you for your work that you've been doing. And then also to say I agree with you, but but being a bit chutzpah agreeing with you, but I'm not actually a member of JDI. But I agree that there's a need for this alternative voice 100%, which is why I wanted to emphasize having a Jewish voice that's supportive of the government, I think is vital, because these smear campaigns are just ridiculous, absurd attempts to undermine legitimate action. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And there's nothing stopping you signing up today.
I'm anti-Zionist. That's the only hurdle.
Yeah, you're still welcome. You're
Thank
welcome. Cape Town, do you have another question lined up? Last one.
Not at the moment.
Okay, well, I think we're done then with the session. Caitlin, thank you very much. That really was very thorough, very interesting, and as Kevin says, absolutely central and very important.
I think
Anton, sorry, if that was the last opportunity, then there is another question. Just one more. Okay. So, Caitlin.
Let's make it quick.
One more where? Did somebody say? So come.
Yes.
You have to be okay.
It's a last minute one, so again, I hope it makes sense. Okay, so the 7th of October presented a strategic surprise, I think, on a global level. We can debate whether this is true or not, that's a different thing. But if we agree, then in that space, the current coalition has used that space to bring their vision into practice. And the vision is to resettle the northern part of Gaza. That's the plan. That's what's happening. If we are not debating, if we're still debating this, then we are a few steps behind. That's what's happening. So now, from a legal point of view, we're still thinking, asking, is it genocide? Is it not genocide? Legally, I mean, not in terms of what you believe, but legally, is it legally genocide? But now the next steps are already happening. So what is that? What, in terms of international law, what is the impact of that? I mean, is there a conversation in international legal space about the settlement of Gaza currently happening in anticipation of the next steps? And if so, what is it? What does it look like?
Thank you.
So, yeah, I'll try to be brief because I know we have another speaker that everyone's, including me, looking forward to. It is hard to answer in that, of course, I mean, Israel has no claim to northern Gaza. There's no legitimate right for it to resettle. There's no right that it has to resettle or to settle northern Gaza. So it would be the expulsion would technically be a form of ethnic cleansing. Then that's a crime against humanity. You can't do that. Resettling.
Already happened.
Yeah.
In the northern Gaza,
Sorry, sorry.
So,
we have to wrap it up. So let's finish so we can.
It would certainly be illegal. Let's just put it that way. What specific crime it is maybe debatable. Okay, thank you.